Welcome back, listeners. This is Breaking Down Security. Mr. Betcher and I, welcome, Mr. Betcher, firstly.
Hello.
You know, we were digging around in the supply closet, and we had a guest hiding out in there. And, you know, he's somebody of note. You might have heard him on another probably a little more famous podcast than ours. He does quite a bit with PowerShell. He worked up until recently at Black Hills, and now he's going to be working for Dave Kennedy over there at Binary Defense. Welcome, Mick Douglas, to the podcast.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Yes, I'm so happy you came on. We actually had you coming on under different circumstances, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But for people who have not heard of you, which what's that?
I'm a nobody. There's plenty who haven't heard about me.
What? Come on now. Well, why don't you give us a quick rundown of who you are and what you do, and maybe a little bit of your origin story of how you started along your career in InfoSec and IT.
Okay, well, my name's Mick Douglas, and I'm a real passionate geek when it comes to things of InfoSec. I like the blinky lights. I can't resist buying new technology and breaking it and seeing what I can do with it. I was invited to do the Google Glass project, and that's a fun little bit of tech, but it's not quite yet ready for prime time. There's no real uses for it yet, but for most consumers. But, you know, I like flipping bits and having fun. One of the things that I did that got a little bit of notoriety was I made Netcat, or rather a PowerShell implementation of Netcat that I call PowerCat. One of the interns, Luke Baggett, and I had a whole lot of fun making this thing do all kinds of crazy stuff. And it started off as a proof that it could be done. And by the time we were done, we had a really crazy, powerful PowerShell script that allows you to push shells through just about any kind of network defense, and antivirus and IDS IPS is not going to be able to save you. So it's pretty fun, and I've been enjoying PowerShell for a little bit. And of late, I've been trying to get more into my defensive roots. About 4 or 5 years ago, I had a job where I was helping a not-for-profit library cooperative, and I did a lot of blue team work there. And going to work for Darth Kennedy, as you call him, is just like going back to my roots.
He's never been called Darth Kennedy before. So that's pretty awesome. You were, I forgot about PowerCat. Man, that is, PowerCat.
Yeah, PowerCat. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember when you brought that up on Paul Security Weekly, where you used to be on quite often. The reason we were going to have you on initially, and it's sad because I had hoped to meet you when you came up here to Seattle. We could have sat down at a bistro and had a nice adult beverage, was you were going to do the Sec 522 course up the 1st of June. And one of the gentlemen at SANS, Eric Johnson, had reached out to me and said, "Hey, why don't you have Mick on and talk about the class?" Obviously, he was trying to get us to pimp the class, which we were more than happy for because we like the SANS organization. We have a vested interest in them. So me and Mr. Betcher both have our GWAPs. And then a couple of days later, it was like, "Oh, we had to cancel the class." And I was like, "Well, why?" And why is that?
Well, I don't know. There just wasn't that much involvement or interest, rather, from folks in the Seattle region, which is kind of sad. One of the things that kind of draws me to the Dev 522 class is that it's a defensive-oriented class. Mm-hmm. We certainly teach you the actual techniques and tools that attackers use, but it's more about how you can detect the attack, harden your system, and basically make applications be tamper evident and mm-hmm. also much more harder to attack. So it's a very fun class. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's in the industry, in my opinion, people tend to be leaning a little bit more attacker focus. To be sure, it's usually a little easier to be an attacker because all you have to do is kick things in and say, hey, that's broke, I'm out.
Yeah.
So being a pen tester is a little easier. As an attacker, you do have some advantages. You only need to get one way in, and it's lights out for the defense. One of the things that I'm hoping that I can do, at least with Sands, is help get the word out that there are defensive advantages. I mean, after all, it is our home network. We should know it better. If you get woken up at dark 30 and you hear some sort of strange sound in the house, and you do realize that you have a home invader in that unfortunate situation, the chances are that you would be able to figure out where you could make some improvised weapons, or how you could even get to some weapon if you have some nearby in your house, or even how you would escape because it's familiar turf for you. But unfortunately, we're just seeing over and over again when we do incident response, when the Verizon data breach report comes out, that
Hmm.
people don't understand what normal is in their network. And so the bad guys are able to camp out, in some cases, months
Yep.
or even years before they get caught. And I want to help, toss a life preserver out to the blue team, because it's a really tough gig, and hopefully we can start doing some things in the industry to make it a little bit easier. Dev 522 is an area that I'm very passionate about, because so many of the attacks we're seeing right now are coming through from the web. If you think about it, back in the day, if you were a bad guy trying to attack an organization, you would have to crack through their firewall, get past all their IDS, IPS, do several hops before you got to the database. Well, now, through the magic of SQL injection, you can just do it from the comfort of your own couch without having to do any kind of network shenanigans. And it's almost like attackers now have a VPN directly into your database. And we're seeing that over and over again with different attacks, that what used to be a minor vulnerability in the back-end infrastructure all of a sudden is lights out critical when it gets exposed to the internet through web applications. So hopefully things can get a little bit better. Unfortunately, I don't see that trend reversing anytime soon. One of the things that's very sobering in that class is when you start getting into web services and AJAX,
Hmm.
the surface area grows quite significantly. So it's not an easy thing to do, but it is a winnable fight if you know what you're doing and know what normal is in your environment. And that's what that class is all about.
Okay. So so you teach about Ajax. I'm assuming all of the OWASP top 10 is basically covered at some point in the.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about the ones that everybody instantly thinks of, SQL injection, cross-site
Mhm.
scripting, cross-site request forgery, all of those. But we also go into ones that aren't immediately apparent to folks. For instance, we go into the local file include, remote file include. We go into XML entity injection, which is roughly the equivalent of a SQL injection in an XML file. We
Okay.
go into XPath injection. We go into XQuery injection. One of the things that I really love is there's a section on the day 5 of this class where we talk about attacks using Unicode to evade input sanitization routines.
Sure.
And it's one of those things where the defenders, the people who take this class, always have a little mini freak out, because we have a document that they look at the file in one way and they see a classic cross-site scripting attack and they say, okay, this is bad. But then they look at the file using a different viewer and all of a sudden they just see some standard Chinese characters and they just have this holy, like, we're really screwed. We're hosed. Like, how do we defend this? And so we talk about things that aren't getting as much attention and love, like things like how do you do your normalization? What input sanitization routines do you do for your UTF-8 encoding?
Hmm. So it sounds like a lot of what you're doing would also benefit red team people as well, because you're showing people how to defend against the application, but you're showing them the same type of examples that you would see in, say, Sec 542, except from a defensive point of view.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things that I think is kind of weird is that in a way, the whole red team versus blue team thing is kind of a false dichotomy because when you think about it, offense will inform your defense and defense will also inform your offense.
Hmm.
And so I think that the people who make really good pen testers are the people who have some experience running things like host-based intrusion prevention systems. They understand how they work. They understand how to bypass them. And likewise, defenders who have had some seat time as a pen tester, or maybe understand vulnerability scanning tools at a deep level, usually do better because they understand what the attack traffic looks like. They
Hmm.
understand what odd traffic it looks like in the environment. A big one that I always like to look for right away, say, I had a networking friend of mine early on in my career point out that they said, "Hey, we found somebody that's in our network." And I said, "Oh, cool. Like, what's going on?" And, we looked at the environment logging systems, and I was expecting like this big "you've been hacked" button to be flashing. And unfortunately, no such a thing exists. But what this guy noticed was that there was workstation to workstation traffic, which is very weird. And
Mm,
when he
yeah.
explained that that just doesn't happen in this environment, he was able to start following the path that this attacker was doing as they were pivoting through the network.
Wow.
So Mick, is you mentioned IPS. Is it trivial to bypass an IPS?
Yeah, see, the problem is that almost all defensive technologies we have right now are based off of signatures. And as an attacker, I am always able to twist my packet or my attack traffic in a way that your IDS or IPS isn't going to be able to see it. A perfect example, in a lot of the SANS classes, they show you how to use tools like FragRoute or FragRouter to make fragmented packets and twist them up using different encoding techniques in such a way that the IPS can't handle it. Now, in the real world, that's not that simple. Usually, what attackers will do is they will do a couple of attacks. Usually, they'll do things like Unicode. How the device actually handles Unicode can at times be different from the web application layer or the web presentation layer that's taking the input. And all you have to do is know a little bit more of the environment than what the defense teams have. And unfortunately, we're seeing fairly complex attacks being done by people who have a lot of money to gain. So in many cases, we have reason to believe that they've gone out and bought the technologies that people are using to protect their environment. So they have their own home lab or their own attack work lab that very closely mimics your environment, and they're able to figure out what the magic sequence is to bypass all of your controls. Now, the thing is, it's shocking how easy it is to do this. And one of the things that I do, I'm not too proud to admit this, but I will sometimes use these Unicode style techniques to bypass like vulgarity filters on forums. So if I want to tell some noob exactly what I think of them, I can do that
Pretty
using
easy. Yeah.
Unicode.
Very nice.
So you mentioned IPSs, IDSs as well. Is that just using encrypted messages back and forth, or
Well, no, IPS is intrusion prevention systems.
right?
IDS are intrusion detection systems. And so what an IDS does is it says, hey, there's an alert, somebody's doing an attack, and it will just let the traffic continue to flow.
So
An
if you
IPS,
try if you try an attack, and whether it works or not, chances are you're detected at that point, right?
well, that's the $20 question because in a lot of cases, take like the target breach. I feel bad mentioning this, but the target breach was a big problem because they had plenty of notifications that the attack was going on. They just couldn't see it. One of the things that gets me really frothy in the mouth, angry, and just ready to flip tables over is when I go to a security conference and they're like, oh, you got to tune your IDS and intrusion detection. You got to tune your SIM, your log management system, and it's not that easy. Anybody who says that it is selling you something. The thing that I hear all the time is it's like finding a needle in a haystack. Well, it's not. It's like finding a needle in a pile of needles. How do
Hmm.
you know what bad is if you don't know your environment? And one of the things that's really a problem about this is that through mergers, acquisitions, and just how long people are able to stay at jobs, there's not a lot of people who really have a deep, deep understanding of what normal is on our network or how the applications work. And it's getting worse when you start thinking about things like Internet of Things and service-oriented architectures that are happening. All these web services are getting spun up faster and faster, and nobody knows what they should be talking to or how they should be talking to one another. A lot of times at Black Hills, when we do attacks, a client will say, hey, do you want to know what sort of defensive technologies, like what sort of WAF, what sort of intrusion detection system we have? And I thought John, the owner of Black Hills, was being incredibly cocky when he said, no, we don't care. We're usually going to go through it as if it doesn't exist. And I was like, wow, no way. And then I started doing pen tests with Black Hills, and
Mm.
it made me very, very sad and a little scared with the ease with which we were able to bypass all of these technologies. Um, any signature detection based technology is a recipe for disaster. And if you don't believe me, go back on the Black Hills InfoSec webcast archive. There was a webcast where we showed bypassing the top 10 antivirus solutions out there based off of sales numbers, and we bypassed all 10 of them live in under 1 hour.
Wow. I'll have
It
to get
was,
that link and
and
post it on the show notes.
yeah, okay, I'll get that to you. And the thing that was really sad about this was John deliberately kind of gamed it for us. He told us that he was thinking about having us do this, and then he gave us only like a day or two to bypass these all. So it was, just to highlight how bad signature-based defense is. And actually, for my defense or my evasion technique, I used a very early form of PowerCat for that.
Nice.
Okay,
So
okay. So you said that it's trivial to do this. What's the answer? I mean, is the answer getting somebody that actually knows what they're doing to massage these systems and knows their environment well and is able to combat these attacks? Or I mean, are you just saying, I don't care who you put on it, I'm still getting through?
Well, I got bad news. Whoever you put on it is going to have a bad time, and they're usually going to be able to get in. What you need to start doing as an organization is figure out where your crown jewels are and harden those boxes. There are amazing configuration guidelines by the Center for Internet Security, and
mhm.
also the Department of Defense has a thing called the DISA STIGs.
This is
Those
Stiggs. That's right.
those are amazing. And as a pen tester, those are like getting kicked in the teeth
Hmm.
because those systems are so much more resilient. They're hardened. There's fewer services up and running. One of the things that, depending on what mode you're running them in, some of those disastigs will include having firewalls on the host-based system such that you can't initiate an outbound connection. And one of the things that almost makes it kind of like one of those Zen riddles is if an attacker puts malware on your system, but it can't phone home, is your system really compromised?
Mm.
You
Yes,
know,
very
and
nice.
it's one of those things where a lot of organizations do the same things as their peers. They try to do it a little faster or a little bit more, and it's honestly it's insane. We've for how long have we had firewalls, antivirus, IDS, IPS, DLP? We've had all these technologies for 10 years at least. DLP is the new kid on the block, but it's like what, 5 years? You
Hmm.
know, everybody, they're known commodities. But you look at the attack tools, the cadence with which they're coming out, it's much more rapid. We can't continue doing what we've been doing over and over again. It's clearly not working.
Yeah.
And so we need to move away from signature-based detection, and in its place, we need to start understanding how our applications work, which systems talk to one another on a normal basis. Understand, for goodness sakes, egress filtering. A lot of organizations think that DLP is the end-all be-all, and I got bad news. There's no attacker, no pen tester in the history of ever that's got into an environment, was able to take over their domain, and then said, oh, DLP, boo. It just doesn't happen. What really needs to happen is controlling outbound communications. Many people don't understand the power that an egress filter on your firewall can give you.
Yep.
Firewalls can work both ways. The number of times that you have a web server initiating an outbound connection to the internet should be fairly limited, and it should only be like maybe one or two like cases in an enterprise, but in the main it should never happen. Another one that we see all the time when we're doing incident response is look at your environment, look at your transaction logs, look at your Oracle logs that show what queries are run. If you have errors on a query in a production environment, something really bad is going on. That absolutely positively needs to be tended to. And that's actually the point in, when I get to that point in Dev 522, I'm usually standing on a chair or on a desk, like having a kind of heavy metal moment, because that, you know, when you're doing a SQL injection attack, that usually is a very, very noisy attempt. And you're going to have all kinds of errors as you're trying to enumerate the database system. I don't care how bad your developers are. I don't care how lame they are. You will never, ever see a developer do something like select database version off of production. And yet, these sorts of queries happen all the time, and nobody flips out. When I see something like that, I think that the Huns are at the gate, and they've got their pitchforks and swords and torches already, and we're sitting, you know, inside the castle eating bonbons. When you see something like that, that's a clear indicator that there's an attack going on, and you best get to the wall to start pouring the boiling oil, or else it's going to be lights out real soon.
Yeah, you talk about logs in 522, like what types of logs to look at, and what kind of signatures to look for in the logs.
Well, not only that, we also talk about logs as an attack method. A couple of years ago, there was an amazing attack that Daryl Hyland did, where he came up with a method of creating a cross-site scripting injection bit of code as the access point names on a wireless network. And so he would spin up this Wi-Fi pineapple that had the cross-site scripting injection attack, and he would just sit in a network waiting for an administrator to log into the web interface for the wireless LAN controller. As soon as they click the show rogue access points, the cross-site scripting injection attack takes place, and he was able to take over the, able to send a beef hook, an attack into the web access portal. Now, so logs rather can be an attack platform, and we talk about that in the class, but then we also talk about what to look for in your logs. So for instance, your access logs and error logs on your web server should be a good indicator of how users are using your environment. They also are good indicators that an attack is taking place, or somebody is beginning to do the initial phases of an attack. You'll also see things like I mentioned in the database logs. Those are very, very detectable, and yet they're so often overlooked. And the thing that really makes me sad is people don't look at their web application firewall logs or their load balancer logs. Those two devices are a godsend from a network forensics standpoint. The ability that those systems have for logging should not ever be underestimated. As a matter of fact, I think a web application firewall, if you had it set to allow any traffic back or forth either way, would still be worthwhile just by how fast they log. I've seen many organizations where an auditor says, hey, you're not logging enough things at this particular layer in your web stack, and they try turning it on in a non-production environment, and it just craters the system because they'll have, you know, a 20 30, maybe even more percentage hit in terms of performance. And there's not a whole lot of web clusters out there in a production environment that can take that sort of a performance penalty and just shrug it off. So things like load balancers and web application firewalls have logging facilities. For goodness sakes, use them.
Yeah. So when you're in your class, do you get excuses for, SQL injection? SQL injection requires two components. One, your database has to have the ability to run executable commands, which can be shut off in most databases, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So some of it is on the developer for making the ability to, he's not sanitizing his inputs. So, you get your or 1 = 1. But the other half is the IT administrator who's not securing the configuration properly. Are we putting too much emphasis on the web developer to make sure that he is being protected on the back end when in fact we should be looking at the IT guy? Or maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe we should be going, okay, IT guy, do your job. Hey, web developer, do your job.
Well, I think there's also another party that's responsible in that too. Where's the DBAs? The DBAs should be a little salty anytime they're seeing odd queries coming in. DBAs should be really hounding the devs to be using prepared SQL statements. There is no reason for you to be taking and generating dynamic SQL. This is one of those real sad points, I think, in IT right now. Parameterized or prepared SQL statements, however you want to call them, have a real cool security advantage. If you do the traditional or 1 = 1 attack, say in like your username field, the database is actually going to look for a username of or 1 = 1 because any meta characters are rendered as just straight string. It loses all the power that it has. But here's the little bit that nobody's talking about, and this just like is so confounding to me. Prepared SQL statements run a little faster. It's not going to be a huge performance hit or a huge boost. It's not like you're going to be able to just, collapse the entire database stack down to one server, but it's a little faster. I've seen like maybe a 5% performance gain, and I don't know any production system where they'd be like, oh, 5% improvement now, we're good. We don't want that. It's so sad. You've got, the performance gain at the database. The devs should be doing good code. I mean, one of the things that is so sad, though, is I talk to people at different phases in their career, and until they get some security training, they're just ignorant of this. And if you look at many of the how-to sample guides online, they give you SQL and statements like, here's your, my first query, are just basically begging to be used with SQL injection attacks because there's no input sanitization, there's no care that the attacker or that the user could be the attacker. So that's a problem. But then to top it off with your point, there are plenty of configuration changes that could be done that would have almost no impact on the code. If you're using like a framework like PHP, for instance, one that's many people consider just riddled with security issues. PHP you can effectively nullify so many of the SQL injection attacks in a PHP environment by using the magic quotes with your SQL in the php.ini config, and that simple change doesn't require the PHP code to be modified in any way, allows the environment to be much, much more resilient to attacks. So I think there's plenty of blame to go all around. I also think that there's a lot of blame to be put on, quite frankly, the security industry. One of the things that gets me kind of salty is when I see somebody talking about cross-site scripting attacks, and they always show that, little pop-up, the JavaScript pop-up, cross-site scripting or vulnerable. And, that doesn't show how horrifically, mind-bendingly, pants-crappingly scary these things are. One of the things that I like to do for the devs is when I find that in an environment, I will use beef hooks to make it so that it's truly weaponized, and then I'll start using beef hooks to do all kinds of shenanigans, like doing a browser-based keylogger. But here's the thing that I don't ever see any people doing is talking to management in a way that management can understand. When I find a cross-site scripting inject in a web application and I'm going to management, I do not ever show them a JavaScript inject. I do an HTML inject and I deface the web page and I say, our product stinks. Go buy it from the competitor instead. And they'll like, hey, how much money is it going to take? Like, just you name the number of wheelbarrowfuls of money and we will get it to you right now. Because it's something that they can get. It's something they can understand.
Yeah. So you are moving from a predominantly red team position to a more blue team position. Binary Defense is Dave Kennedy's other company, Trusted Sec being his offensive company, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see yourself as being more of they use the term purple teamer, somebody
Yes.
who's a blue teamer who's going to also be on the offense as well? Do you see that as more of what you're going to be moving into instead of strictly being on the defensive side?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I hope to bring to Binary Defense is that purple team stuff, because one of the things that a lot of organizations don't get is the so what. You know, all the time you have auditors come in and say, hey, you need to flip this bit. And the auditor says, well, it's really important or else I'm going to hit you with a PCI stick.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, it gets modified, but the bigger context gets lost. So purple team is where you can actually start doing things where you have your red team working with your blue team. And that's one of the things that I like about Dave Kennedy's approach to doing InfoSec. And that is something that we also did at Black Hills, is both of those companies, what they will offer the client is during the scoping of the engagement, we'll say, hey, when we do the pen test, do you want us to be sitting down with your MSSP or your SOC? And it'll be a slower pen test. We're not going to get the same amount of coverage. But while we're doing this, I mean, it's literally going to be as whatever you want. Do you want it to be where, hey, I'm about to send a packet, network defenders, can you see it? Here it goes, 3, 2, 1, boom. Oh, you didn't see that? All right, well, here's what you should have seen. And that way it's a very real, not only is it just a trial by fire, but it's a learning experience for both sides. And, I always loved it when I was a pen tester and got to do that because I got to have a better game in terms of how I could fly low and slow under the network defense radar.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not doing
of takers did you have?
I would say that maybe somewhere between 10 and 20%. There's a growing interest in there because quite frankly, it's a really powerful tool to up the skill of your defense and your offense. And the other thing that's really cool about that, if you really want to have a bloodbath on a pen test, sit down with the developers, sit down with the security operations center and say, okay, guys, where would you want me to go after? And they will show you where the bodies are. And they'll be like, here's what you do, tweak this, tweak that, and domain admin. And I mean, the scariest people in your organization, make no mistake about it, are the people who are watching your defensive tools, if they're skillful.
Well, the thing with that is a lot of them know that there's a problem and they've brought that to management, and they can't get anything done because there's no budget for XYZ, or we can't do this resource. So they're your insider threat. If they ever get disgruntled enough, they know where the bodies are, like you said, and those are the people you want to keep happy. So obviously, you, at being the base consultant who's coming in, is a driver for change. I actually had this exact conversation about a company that we're bringing in. I was like, hey boss, if we've got some other things we want to bring up to management, the pen testing company or the consulting company who's coming in to help us do some threat modeling is probably going to be able to help us out with that by putting it in the report. So it's very much a real deal.
Yeah, that definitely helps. I mean, one of the things that I've been seeing lately, though, is that companies are starting to rethink the no security spending at all. Because, if anything, the takeaway from 2014 is that nobody's safe. And, one of the things that I think got lost on the industry was that until Target had its breach, they were the darling of the retail industry in terms of having good security.
Mm-hmm.
There were trade shows where people were like, man, if we could only be as good as Target. And now all of a sudden their name is mud. You look at folks like JP Morgan Chase, they got hit. And, rumor has it they've got some folks that know what they're doing. And I believe that, they probably have, a little bit of spend in terms of how they defend their organization. So a lot of companies are now looking to see how they can invest in security. I think the big challenge that we as security professionals face now is how we can show them what the opportunity costs are and be mindful of that. That, it's usually not the dollar figures for the particular tool, it's the lost chances for being able to deploy additional servers,
Mm-hmm.
or how do we add, if we're having the developers refactor code, we can't innovate, we can't put out new features to our existing product suite. And that's a big problem that InfoSec people are really missing the boat at. If you want to kind of get up to speed on where a lot of the more forward-thinking folks are, there's a really good read called The Phoenix Project by Kim, and it's a real quick read, and it's actually rather fun as far as business IT books go. I know it's kind of cheesy to say that, but it was shockingly good. And in it, you actually realize that one of the villains is the security group in terms of having this organization succeed in their objectives of delivering software on time and on budget. And
That's right.
at the end of the book, they kind of walk through how they were able to rethink things and make it so that the security team was being able to work a little bit better with folks.
Right. I read that book, and I think
Did
in the
you?
beginning,
Did
security
you
team
really
was
read that
bringing
book?
down.
Did you really read that book? I mean, you read every book. You're like, oh, I've got this book. I got,
mm,
Did you really read that book?
Yes, in it, the security team or the security guy brought down systems in production because he wanted to fix this flaw. He thought it was incredibly important, and turns out, big picture, wasn't that big a deal at all. So,
Mm.
he he had a coming to Jesus moment there. But yeah,
Wow.
I agree. That's a good book. There are some cheesy parts in it a little bit, but
Yeah.
yeah, it really opens your eyes from the perspective of the IT organization in general. You mentioned JP Morgan got hit, but that was advanced persistent threat. So really, there's not
That was
anything an
sophisticated.
organization can do. Uh, mature, secure organization can do against that.
Well, there are. So one of the things that I found really sad about that was just the scale at which they were able to get away with. I don't care whether or not somebody's in your organization or not. I don't care what their skill level are, but you should be able to detect them faster. There's a formula that is an older formula. It's from a book called Time-Based Security by Win Schwartau. And in that formula, its attack time is that greater than or less than your detection time plus your reaction time. If you look at things like the Verizon data breach report, year in and year out, it takes months before those attacks are detected, and that's awful. One of the things, I know that you guys brought me on to talk about Dev 522, but there's a security class called Security 550 from SANS. It's active defense. And one of the things that we talk about is just how posed we are with our current technologies and detection tools. One of the things that organizations could be doing to collapse that is to do things like create honey tokens or honey records in the database, or maybe even honey tables in the database. So for instance, I for the last couple of years, every web application that I've made has a table called credit card info or something along those lines. And it doesn't do a thing with credit cards. There's
Mhm.
no processing at all. But speaking as a pen tester, that's like crack. Once you get in and start enumerating the table names and you see credit card info and you do a select on that, and I'll be mean, I'll generate real looking credit card stuff that would pass the mod 10 Lund check. And so it looks legit. They try to dump the entire table. I'll make it huge so I have a better shot of noticing that all that data traipsing across the network. And they can do whatever they want. Let's say they have an SSH tunnel or an SSL tunnel outbound. That's fine and dandy, but if they're trying to move 1 gig off my network, that's a little weird.
Mm.
You should be able to detect this. There's ways that you can make even advanced persistent threat be nullified by setting up honey point or honey pots. And it doesn't have to be the big time sync ones that back when I did my CISSP, the ISC squared was all, oh, honey pots are just a waste of time. It's just a huge time sink. And it doesn't have to be that way. You can make very lightweight honey pots, little tripwires that as soon as they get triggered, you can swoop in and start figuring out what the heck's going on. One of the biggest things that you as an organization need to start doing is planning for the day when all your defenses get bypassed.
Sure.
And too few organizations model that up.
Yeah, and the idea is to, if you can't stop them, you want to hassle the attacker to make it to the point where they either get so frustrated they don't want to attack your network because it's like, I got to do, now I've got to figure out which one is a fake host, or oh, I touched this port and now that box is gone because it's been shut down. We've had Benjamin Donnelly on to discuss ADHD. Really sharp dude. I mean, young punk. He just, God, it kills me. He's just so
I'm glad that he's a good guy, because just the way that he thinks is quite frankly scary. One of the things that he was doing with ADHD is he even came up with some pretty interesting ones. One of which is called crypto locked.
Mm-hmm.
Did he talk about that on the show with you guys?
Oh yeah, he talked about that one. Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah.
Because that one's beautiful. So the entire idea behind crypto lock is you do something that proves to me you're a bad guy, at which point that box will take a memory snapshot and power itself down.
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of that is, congratulations, you've taken one node out of the web cluster offline. Everybody else is still fine and dandy, but the incident response team has everything they need, and it's forensically pure in a way that they're never used to getting.
Yep.
And so, one of the things that I'm really hopeful of is that there's folks like Ben out there that are doing things that make it really tough on the bad guys. Matt Graber, for instance, is another one that has been doing some real interesting research. He made a tool called Honey Tokens, where it will use PowerShell to inject fake user and fake passwords into an LSAS process, so they look like a normal user login. And so when an attacker runs a tool like Mimikatz and they pull the username and password down in clear text, anytime you see a login event for this user ID, somebody has scraped RAM out of your box. And so things like that are just incredibly powerful, and they're starting to flip the tables on the bad guys. And I think that's what we need to keep doing as defenders, is keep on pushing that envelope and figuring out what we can do to annoy them. One of the things that I've been playing around with a little bit is making very enticing zip file names that are crazy huge zip bombs, so that when you open them up, all of a sudden, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Attacker, I need to use 15 terabytes of disk, and just annoy the snot out of them. Wow. And one of the things that's weird is, from time to time when I talk about these things, usually it's more of the not to make too gross of a generalization, but that hasn't stopped me so far. Usually it's the business people who will say, well, won't that make the attacker angry? And I'm like, well, you know what? If they're already going after you,
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do that will really stop them. All you're doing is you're buying yourself more time
Yep.
so that you can detect them faster, so that you can collapse that response time.
Yep.
And until we can start doing that, it doesn't matter what technology we have. The more I think about it, the more it's about we got to start changing the game up so that we can have a chance to, with our process and people, win this one. We've been trying to out tech them, and it's just not going to work because, quite frankly, in a lot of cases, they have a lot more funding than we do. Their tech is better.
Yeah, they can purchase the FireEye appliance and see if their malware can bypass it before they deploy it. Things like that. I mean, it's scary, but you know, they're innovative.
Do you
So it's time for a blue team to be innovative as well.
do you think that that's a failing on the groups that have those security appliances for not doing proper checks? I mean, I know with like Canvas and Core and those, they kind of do some background checks. They kind of make sure that their product is only going to legitimate companies. If you buy it, it has to be on company letterhead. Obviously, there's probably ways to get around that stuff. You can make fake letterhead and make it look legit. Do you think there needs to be a little more, I don't know, due process in this case when selling these security appliances out, or do you think that there's already enough ways to get around these things that there's no reason to worry about who gets it?
Well, I kind of think that you're almost telling the answer there, that it's almost like it's going to be spending good effort after bad. It's very trivial for someone to create an LLC. And like, take Ohio, where I live, for instance. It's a $50 fee to do your filing, and then there's $100 registration process. So for the low price of $150, I can have my own company name, and then I can just crack out some letterhead, and I'm as official as can be. And it's very difficult if that's what you're trying to do to, win that fight. And I think that if that's your only layer of defense, you're actually going to have a very, very bad time. I'm not going to name the company that did this, but there was a mobile forensics provider that their pretty much all their security was based around, they vetted who was able to buy their devices that did the memory and not disk, but persistent storage analysis. And when it came light that several organized crime units had these devices, they were recovered as part of multidisciplinary raids between groups like ICE and U.S. Marshal Services. When they found these things, that company had a total freak out because they knew that the bad guys were able to actively hide things because they couldn't look in other places. That was a very limited feature set.
Sure.
So if your entire security model is based off of obscurity, you're going to have a bad day. Yeah. That said, I have heard stories of where like folks go to RSA and they're like, hey, yeah, we want to buy that particular, compliance appliance or whatever. And then the vendor's like, oh, great. And they'll say, well, here's what the MSRP is. And the person says, cool, cash okay? And they just start handing out money. Now, I don't know if this really happens or not, but, I almost kind of believe that it does, that the bad guys just go to these early releases and get the code as fast as possible. And if that's happening, I think that that's a little bit of malfeasance on the part of the vendors.